I grew up in a little farm town in north central Illinois, and drugs were not something that was an issue in that town growing up. And it was, all my father, my uncles were all World War II veterans, and I grew up with that legacy and those people. I had a very red-blooded American viewpoint, I mean, of things when I went to school. I went to school primarily because my parents said, we're sending you to college. And I had two brothers, and they said we were all going to go to college. My parents were Depression era kids and grew up with all of that, came from rather depressed backgrounds, and education was a road to success for them. And so I knew I was going to college. I didn't really think much about it. So when it came time to go to college, it was a little bit of a challenge because my grades were not very good. And then we're looking at Vietnam was building up, and I understood if I didn't get to school, I was probably going to get drafted. But I got accepted to a school in Wisconsin, a branch of the university there. But they wanted me to go to summer school and take some courses to show I could do college work. So I went to summer school right out of high school. I mean, about 2 weeks after I graduated, I was up in Wisconsin. And it was a different environment because I see there a lot of these long haired, weird people that I'd seen on TV that I had never really had an opportunity really to interact with in any way. And they had an open forum discussion meeting evening at the student center one night to discuss the war. And I was curious about their viewpoint. Why do they feel this anti-war feeling when, I felt very pro-war, very pro-supportive of that. So I went to that. And as I listened to this discussion, I was surprised at how much made sense to me, what they said. And I kind of reevaluated my position. The point that really hit me was when the thing was over, I stayed after to talk to some of these people. And one of the guys said something to me that, well, if you support our government's policies in Vietnam, why are you here? Why aren't you over there fighting for what you believe? And it really kind of struck me because I was there, so I wouldn't have to go over there and fight for what I believe. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that, it didn't make me feel real good about myself in a way. And I realized that my own future may look at Vietnam and how it may impact me. And that's when I decided that if I can do anything to make this change or stop, I need to do it. And that's when I became involved with the activities as far as protesting and that sort of thing. I felt my place was there, not just for my own personal benefit, but for the people that were in that position of going and even being there. It wasn't that I was against them. I never had the kind of mentality of going to the airport and spit on guys coming back and call them names. But that was the change that came, and when I got interested in doing that, and that's how that came about. So, I was safe as long as I had my deferment and my grades were good. And I had an instance where I didn't make the cut grade wise, and I went on probation. And when I didn't pass the probation, then I had to sit out for a semester. And then I could be readmitted. And so I went home, of course, and went to work and reapplied for readmission. And I got accepted, got everything arranged to go up there. My dad was going to take me to school on Sunday, and that Friday, my draft notice arrived in the mail. And I called the draft board, and they basically said, well, we can do two things. We can either divert you for a year, and you can finish your last year of school, and then you can go in, or you can go in now. And I decided I didn't want to go that last year with all that hanging over me. So after a lot of soul searching, I mean, I really, I think a lot in that position, there's an aspect of being scared, not being certain about what you should do. I investigated a lot of options. We lived right outside of Chicago, so there were places in Chicago that supported people who were looking to avoid the draft and leave the country or whatever. And I went and talked to these folks, and I had an avenue if I wanted to leave the country and do that. But there just was no good choice. Everything had consequences. And it all kind of came down to what I felt like the night before I was supposed to go. I did my dad came down. I was staying in the basement of where they lived, and he came down one evening and sat down with me and basically said that he understood the situation I was in, but whatever I chose to do, that he would support me, which I felt was a big step for them, because both my parents were very much for what was going on in their government and everything. When I thought about it, I I figured if I didn't go, somebody's going in my place. And if I went, then maybe I could prevent somebody else from having to go, from having to take my place. But I don't know. But I got up that morning and my mom and dad took me down to the train station and sent me into Chicago, and the rest is history, as they say.
I think you just answered this question, but one of the questions that was forming in my mind as you were speaking was whether, in retrospect, you're glad that being in Chicago, it's not far to Ontario from there, right? Ontario,
Yeah, yeah.
Canada. In retrospect, are you glad that I don't know if glad is the right word, but if you could run the tape over, would you make the same decision?
I think I would. I mean, there was an aspect about it that was adventure. It was stepping out of your cone of security, um, taking part of something that was bigger than yourself. It was kind of my generation's war, and I had faith. And I was raised as a Christian Scientist, and I had support in that way. I felt that the Lord's going to put me where He needs me to be, and I have to trust that whatever He determines is where I'm supposed to be is what's right. And I just had to have that faith and that trust that whatever happened, I was going to be okay. When I got to Vietnam, I mean, there of course there's a lot of anxiety in that trip going over there, and I was fortunate that I had a buddy with me, so we shared that. But that second night that we were in the replacement center, we went to get a shower, and it was impossible to get a shower during the day because there were like 100 more people in the replacement center, and they had beds full. So it was overcrowded, and you'd spend about 2 hours standing in line in the sun to get in the shower room. So we decided we'll go in tonight, about 2 o'clock in the morning. We'll go get a shower. And we went and did that. And then on the way back to the barracks, you hear this siren in the distance, very distant. And there was this body of water between us to the west, and there was an installation over there. And we looked over there, and they were under attack. They were being rocketed, and we could hear the incoming rockets detonating and siren blowing, and flares going up, and then green tracers going in from the darkness and red tracers going out. And then the gunships get up and shoot them up with miniguns and rockets and stuff. And we're sitting there in the replacement center. We haven't even gotten a replacement center. I don't have a weapon. There's the war. Well, the next day, that's where I was staying. So when I ended up there, after witnessing all this, I kind of had a come to Jesus talk with the Lord. And I told him, you put me here. You put me where you need me, and give me the tools, and I'll do whatever job you want me to do. So I'm putting my hand in yours, and let's go do it. And that's the way I approached while I was there.
As your tour in Vietnam
Yeah.
unfolds, do your anti-war sentiments persist, or do they grow?
Well, once I was drafted, it was kind of hard to resist in the way I had been resisting. But there were a lot of us in the same boat. There were a lot of us that were put in positions of having to go there against our will in a way. And it gave us an attitude that even though, okay, we can't go protest and do things to draw attention to it, but it became more not so much a fight against the war, but in a way, a stand against the army. I mean, that was our nemesis, you might say. I mean, a lot of us were there because of that. And so that was part of the camaraderie that developed, that you protested, but you didn't go out and make a lot of noise. You protested in small ways, like what we did in Vietnam. A lot of the drug use was, and as I point out, it was a protest. Others used it for coping. Um, Others used it as a recreational outlet.
You arrived in
June.
Vietnam in June of 1970,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is pretty late in the war.
yeah. I
What,
felt like we were going over to hold the door open so everybody else could get out.
and you were sort of, because Vietnamization by this point is underway, and you were aware of this, that we're
Yes,
in one
yeah,
way or another, we're on the tail end of this thing.
yeah.
What were your jobs in Vietnam?
I was trained as a weapons specialist to be an armorer and a supply clerk. And the only thing the Army was interested in was that I knew how to type. I mean, from the time I got out of basic and went to my first assignment, walked in the reception center, the first thing the guy asked me was, "Can you type?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Here, sit down here. Here, type this." And I typed, and he said, "We'll keep you." I said, "Come see me tomorrow. Go see this guy." And the same thing when I went to Vietnam. They looked at my records and said, "Can you type?" And I said, "Yeah." That was all they were interested in, was that I could type. And so, that dictated where I ended up.
1970, 1971, when we think about Vietnam
Yeah,
and the guys out in the field, but more I'm thinking life on the bases. One of the things we hear and about this period, and I think this really begins to pick up in 68, 69 and going into 70, is fairly widespread drug use among
yeah,
soldiers. Does that fit with your experience?
yeah. And that was the society, you might say, that you walked into, because there was a division between the heads and the juicers. There was a very clear line there where we were. And I think most places that I was able to interact with other people, you had similar circumstances in other units, that they worked together. But when you were off time, these guys are over here and those guys are over there. And you basically stayed in your corner. I don't know that there was any real interaction between the two. And of course, there were people that crossed those barriers that were in both groups, but so much of uh, the drugs were there. I mean, that was something when I was first there, that one of the first people that took me to the hooch to get me a bunk and get me situated, one of the first things he asked me is, "You smoke dope?" And my standard answer to that was, "I've been known to. I can admit to it without admitting to it." Um, and then he said, "Well, you need to meet the guys next door." And then he took me over to meet the guys next door, and we had a nice chat. And they said, "Come by tonight. Uh, we're going for a walk." And so that's what I did. And then these guys blew me away. I
Yeah.
mean, the consumption, the rate of consumption, um, the the haphazardness of how stuff was handled. I mean, back in the world, stuff like marijuana was hoarded and every little morsel was protected. And over there, it was just like grass. I mean, just spilled it all over, throw away the joints. But it was because it was so inexpensive and available. And so it didn't, I mean, my first night in the company, I knew who was who and what was what. And just from that exposure. So that's how you kind of end up in one group or the other.
So, and the division you're talking about is you're talking about primarily career guys versus the one tour guys?
Well, it wasn't so much the career. I mean, you had that kind of division, I think, even in the NCO and the officers. We had one officer who had been an enlisted man and then an NCO, and then he'd gone to OCS, became an officer. And he ended up, after he came in the company after I did, but he ended up coming over our hooch one night to hang out. And he basically said he's more comfortable with the enlisted guys because he used to be an enlisted. Where hanging around with all the officers, you've got all these career officers and so forth, age-wise, you don't have that connection. And he wanted to just kind of come over and not be Captain Calabrese. He wanted to be one of the guys. And he would accept us just the way we were. And he was that way. He knew what we did, and he had no problem with it. I know there were others that had the same sort of issue, particularly officers that had their group, but the younger officers were more connected than to the older ones. So there was kind of a disconnect there. And I think you also had that with the NCOs. The enlisted guys were, they were the bottom rung on the ladder, so we didn't worry much about it.
My interpretation of what I'm hearing is that by mid 1970, going into mid 1971, that the world in Vietnam you're in, the guys you're serving with, that there's not a whole lot of commitment to making this project in Vietnam work, right?
True.
Make it succeed. And I guess related to that would be, and I don't want to put all these words in your mouth. Here's just, what I'm
Yeah.
interpreting is that there's not a commitment to making this thing succeed. And that probably springs from a sense that this thing is not going to succeed. So we just need to survive for a year and get the heck out.
Well, we were already getting out, and I think it was a matter of, getting out. Everybody was counting time, and they weren't worried about the war or doing something to support the war. We were supporting the war just by being there and doing our jobs. And there wasn't any real commitment to trying to make a difference. You were doing your time and marking your days off till you could go home, and that was all you were working for. That was their motivation, was just do your time, do your job, go home. Don't stay here any longer than you have to.
Now, you were in a non-combat role, but the war did come to you
Yeah.
where you were. I wonder if you could describe, um, one of those incidents when the war does come to where you are.
Well, we were on a small helicopter base, and we were tenant units there. It wasn't very big, but the airfield was the target, was what they were always shooting at. The only problem was that we were downrange, so anything overshot the airfield was in our area. We generally, I think we were only hit one time during the day when I was there. It was always at night. Generally, rockets, you'd hear the rockets come in and it would wake you up, and then the siren would go. sometimes it just didn't hear anything, just a siren would go off in the middle of the night, and then you knew you had to get your stuff together and get out, man the perimeter, because you didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, sometimes they send rockets or mortars at one point of the installation, and then when everything's focusing over there, they're sending sappers through the wire over here while you're not looking. So you always had to man the perimeter there. They did have an episode in the November of '69 when sappers came through the wire, the officers area and the commanding general's quarters were right there by the headquarters. And right in that corner of the compound, and they were trying to get to plant some satchel charges at those barracks. They were caught, and there was a firefight that erupted out there, and one of the guard towers was blown up, and they stopped them though, and I often wondered why the general's trailer was down by the mess hall when all the officers were down over here. And after I found out what happened there, then I realized that's why they moved him down there, because he was just right there in the corner of the compound, and sappers could crawl in through those wires there and get to him. It was a lot of times it was an inconvenience. You hear the siren go, you get up, you don't turn any lights on. It's dark. You get dressed, you get your weapon, your wet gear, and you head out to the perimeter. Usually if there's rounds coming in close, you don't go out because then it stops falling or you get in a bunker. But and I tell you, my close call, running down this street to get out to the perimeter, came to this intersection, and this rocket came by and landed in the intersection in front of me, and it knocked me down. I often thought about, golly, if I was 2 seconds sooner, I would have been gone. It was one of those close calls, but usually we would get out. I was never really, that was the only time I was anywhere close to danger, you might say. The other times it was farther away. It was more of a nuisance than, coming down in your backyard. But you'd stay out there. Usually if there was something serious, the helicopters would get up and they would go out and shoot things up. And then you'd have to stay out there on the perimeter, who knew how long, till they got an all clear signal. We were hit usually about every other week in the middle of the night. I was there 11 months, so you figure 2 times a month, that's about 20-some times we were hit.
Did the contrast ever strike you? Because we were a few minutes ago talking about a general sense among the American soldiers that you're with that we just need to get through this thing. They're winding this war down anyway.
Yeah.
We don't want to be the last Americans to die in Vietnam. We just keep our heads down and get out of here. That's on the one side. On the other side, you've got this incredibly persistent adversary that in one way or another has been at war since the since the 1950s.
Yeah.
Right. Did that at that time, did that contrast ever occur to you that, we're here just getting through it, and those folks are absolutely tenacious?
Yeah. I know. I realized we were part of a long line of folks from the French on down that have been occupied there in some way, shape, or form, and establishing a government. I felt very much that we were holding the door open so people could get out. I mean, you focus on your job. Sometimes I felt like we were like in the westerns at Fort Apache, and we were the cavalry in Fort Apache, and it was Indian country outside there, and in fact that's what they called it. You went outside because they closed it down at night, and you didn't go out at night. Nobody got in until the next morning. And then even in the morning, they opened up, they had to go out and sweep for mines on the roads and snipers before they would let anybody go anywhere. They cleared the roads every day, every morning. And, so it kind of gives you a feeling about where you are and how safe you are.
Did you have many interactions with South Vietnamese, any time in South Vietnamese villages or interactions with South Vietnamese on the base?
We did on the base, we had hooch girls that did the housekeeping and so forth that we paid for. And we also had shit burners that come in and do the nasty work there. We paid and didn't really get to talk to many. I mean, we had gone down to the local village and so forth. Sometimes language was a barrier, but a lot of them spoke at least the English that you could communicate. So I had, contact with some of the local population and so forth, but I didn't really have any in-depth relationship with the Vietnamese themselves. They were just kind of the people that were there.
One of the reasons I asked that is because I'm wondering if you had a sense of whether South Vietnam would be able to stand up on its own when the US and the other allies pulled out.
I don't think we had a sense that South Vietnam was going to be able to stand on their own. A lot of us I know felt that the government was orchestrating a method by which they could um, leave with honor.
That the US government was doing that.
Yeah, it's easy to say, well, we won, we're leaving here, you take over. Which is essentially that I think the perception of a lot of folks in Vietnam. It was just a glory. We'd been there long enough, and ultimately they were going to stand on their own 2 feet. And if they haven't been able to do that by now, giving them all their tanks and guns and stuff to do that with isn't a guarantee that it's going to get done. And I think it has a lot to do with motivation. I mean, I think the North Vietnamese were far more motivated than the South Vietnamese. They were being spoon-fed a lot of stuff, and I think their leadership uh, lacked a little bit. But that at our level where we were, it didn't really impact us that much. We were just the small frogs in the pond.
But it sounds like come April 75, when Saigon falls, it sounds like you probably weren't surprised.
No, no, not really. It seemed a little quicker than what that I had anticipated, but once we were gone, it was up to them.
What impact did that have on you in April 75 when Saigon fell?
I don't know, I felt a sense of hollowness, emptiness, because Vietnam had been something in a way that I'd grown up through my high school years and college. It was always on the news. It was always in the newspapers. It was a topic that was constantly there. And then suddenly it's over. It's question's been settled. It's over. And it's like, what's life going to be without that in the news? I wouldn't say it was like an old friend, but it's like, hey, what are we going to talk about now? But it did seem to come awful quick.
So you arrive home from Vietnam, and is the case for you, what I've heard from others, that within 24 hours you're a civilian?
Yeah, pretty much. Uh, we got to Fort Lewis. It was like after midnight. It was late, and they fed us a steak dinner and so forth, and then we went to bed. And that next morning we were up, and then it was out processing from that point on, and had to take a physical and different things. We there were different briefings and all until we finally got to that final briefing. Page off and said, "You're on your way." I was done. But I left that. I mean, we got it at night. The next night I was done and left. So in a day's time, we were out of there.
That's nice. How did that go for you? I mean, that's a pretty radical transition.
I know,
Yeah.
and I was fortunate. I had a high school friend that was living and working out there at the Navy Yard there at Bremerton, and we'd been in touch when I was in Vietnam, and uh, he came and picked me up when I got out, and we went. He said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "I just wanted to get out of there." We went to a McDonald's, get something to eat, and they didn't have drive-through back then. He went in to get it because I could not get out of the car. I just couldn't get out. I just felt so out of place. There were kids in the parking lot. I think it was Friday night, and they were doing their thing, and it just struck me how life was just going on. Vietnam was happening. It didn't bother them. It wasn't an impact to them. They didn't care who I was or where I'd come from, and I'm just sitting in that car, kind of glad to be where I'm at, but feeling disconnected in a way. I mean, after 16 months, Vietnam was my normal. And then you go back to the world and it's not normal to you. I mean, it's familiar, but it's not normal.
Since that time, have you always felt that being a Vietnam vet kind of sets you apart from the rest of society?
Well, I think that's far more true early. Many years being a Vietnam vet was not a popular thing to be. That's the kind of thing that you just don't share because you don't like getting into the discussions that it generates with a lot of people. Um, I mean, I know there's 25 years before I got to the point that I could even think about putting a license plate on my vehicle that said I was a non-vet. A lot of things that I don't know. It was not something I took pride in, and at that point in time.
How about now?
It's different now because people have come to understand and accept, I think, what we did and what we went through. Um, I'm not hesitant as far as like acknowledging that to people, like I would have been, but it's not something that I broadcast. I mean, I have a couple hats that says Vietnam veteran, but I don't wear stuff like that. I don't want to draw attention to that for some reason. Being a Vietnam veteran is a very personal thing. It's mine. And if I choose not to share it, that's my business. Um, but it's not something that you get into difficulty over like it used to be. I mean, I don't wear Vietnam hat, but I have Montagnard bracelets, which a lot of us got over there. And I took them off when I got home. And after about 25 years, I pulled them out. And it's one way because non-vets will recognize them. And I've had several times people say, "Oh, those are Montagnard bracelets." And yes, when we do in country. But that's the only thing that I wear as such that is non-related. And now that I say that, I take that back. I have a quartz crystal I picked up over there. We found a whole mountainside that was full of these quartz crystals. And everybody thought, "Oh, diamonds," and they were going nuts. Of course, we were partying, I will put it that way. So it affected, I think, our perception somewhat. And I also have a little piece of mortar fragment I picked up in Dogma 10, but I don't ship those.
Yeah. And the Montagnard bracelets, did you buy those in the village?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah, there were Montagnards near us. We would go to the village sometimes. But it was something that a lot of guys wore and just picked it up as part of that persona, you might say. It seemed like all the old timers had them.
sure.
It was something that you acquired. But there was a lot of, when I came home, like I said, I put a lot of all that away. I had too much difficulty with people. I was fortunate coming home through the airport, even wearing a uniform, that I wasn't set upon as such. I was shunned. Uh, you walk into the waiting area at the gate in the plane you get on, sit down in the waiting area, and everybody around you gets up and goes to the other side of the waiting area and sits down. Not long after our newborn daughter was brought home from the hospital, Star and I went out for one of our walks in the neighborhood. We talked about whatever she wanted to talk about, and on this day we were chatting about her new baby sister. This led to discussing the fact that her mommy and daddy had been together before she was born. Then she asked a rather startling question. Where was I before I was with you and mommy? This caught me off guard, but pointing to the sky, I responded, you were a bright light in the heavens, waiting to come and be with us when the time was right. She pondered this a moment and then asked, where was Lacey before she came here? I responded, she was up in heaven with you, until it was time for her to come and be with us. You girls were out there until it was time for you to come and bless your mommy and daddy. You came first, and now it's Lacey's time to be with us. She became excited, like she just remembered something. I was not prepared to hear what she had to say. Yes, yes, I remember, she exclaimed. I watched over you when you were a soldier. I hardly knew what to say. I clearly remembered the times I felt like I had a guardian angel watching over me. I realized she could be reaching pre-birth memories, and I knew this was a briefly opened window to find validation. She said she watched over me. What did you see? I asked. Without hesitation, she said one word, twice. Sand, sand. What did you do? Sounding a little irritated that I'd asked her that, she replied, I had to bring you home.